The warning lights inside the wreck were already flashing red when I climbed through the broken hull, and I knew before Owen said a word that we were running out of time. Debris fields like this one did not stay quiet for long. Metal groaned around us, shifting under pressure that had been building for years, maybe centuries, ever since this graveyard of dead warships had drifted into a slow orbit around a star nobody bothered to name. My scanner clicked out a countdown that meant nothing good, and somewhere behind me, Lily's voice crackled through my earpiece, tight and fast. "Movement on the outer hull," she said. "Something is out here with us." I did not stop to ask what kind of something. In a place like this, it never mattered. Raiders, drones, leftover automated defenses that never got the message the war ended. It all wanted the same thing from scavengers like us, which was for us to be gone, one way or another. Owen was ahead of me, cutting through a collapsed corridor with a torch that threw long shadows across walls scarred by old battle damage. He worked fast, hands steady even with the ship groaning under our boots, and he had been doing this long enough that fear did not slow him down anymore. It slowed me down. I had learned to live with that. "Ethan," he called back, "you feel that?" I did. A hum, low and steady, coming from somewhere deeper in the wreck, a vibration that did not match the dying groans of a broken ship. Everything else out here was cooling metal and dead circuits. This was something else, something that had not stopped working. "We should not be feeling anything," Lily said in my ear. "This whole sector reads dead on every scan we have run." "Then the scans are wrong," Owen muttered, and kept moving. We found the source of the hum behind a wall of collapsed plating, wedged so deep into the surrounding wreckage that it looked like the debris field had grown around it rather than crushed into it. A hull section, smooth and untouched, free of the scorch marks and fractures that covered everything else out here. No dust, no decay. It sat in the dark like it had been waiting, patient in a way nothing built by human or alien hands should be able to manage after all this time. Owen's torch swept over a plate of markings near what looked like a sealed hatch. He went quiet, in a way that worried me, more than shouting would have. "That is a royal seal," he said. "I have only ever seen pictures of one of these." I asked him what that meant, and he did not answer right away, which told me more than anything he could have said. "Ships marked like this were not supposed to exist anymore," he finally said. "Not out here. Not anywhere a person like us could reach them. If the old stories are even half true, that hatch has killed people for touching it wrong." Behind us, the sound of tearing metal rolled through the corridor, closer than it had been a minute ago. Whatever was hunting us on the hull had found a way in. Lily's voice came through sharp and clipped. "Movement inside the wreck now. Not us. Get clear." There was no clear to get to. The path behind us led back toward whatever had just broken through, and the only way forward was past that hatch, into a dead end, or through it, into whatever waited on the other side. I made the choice before I let myself think too hard about it, because thinking too hard about it would have gotten us caught in that corridor, with something closing in from behind. I reached out and pressed my palm flat against the panel beside the hatch, the way you would press a hand against any old lock, hoping something inside still had power enough to open. For a long second nothing happened, and I thought Owen's warning had been for nothing, that this was just another dead hull like every other dead hull we had stripped for parts. Then the panel warmed under my hand, and light bled out from beneath the surface in a pattern that looked less like machinery waking up, and more like something opening its eyes. The hatch did not creak or grind the way old machinery should. It slid apart in total silence, and the light that spilled out from inside was clean and steady, nothing like the flickering emergency glow we carried on our own gear. Owen grabbed my arm before I could step through. "Do not go in there," he said, voice low. "If that thing reads your hand and decides you are not who it is looking for, it will not give you a second chance to walk away." I told him we did not have another option, not with something already inside the wreck behind us and closing fast. He did not argue after that, because he knew I was right, and because the sound of pursuit had grown loud enough now that arguing was a luxury none of us could afford. We went through together, the three of us crowding into a corridor that lit itself as we moved, panels along the walls brightening in sequence like the ship was tracking us, learning our shapes as we passed. The air inside smelled clean in a way that made no sense for something buried this deep in a graveyard for this long. My scanner screamed contradictions at me, readings that made no sense. Power signatures where there should have been nothing but cold metal. Then a voice spoke, and every one of us froze. It did not come from a speaker I could see. It came from everywhere at once, calm and layered, like more than one voice, speaking in perfect unison. And it used a title I had never heard before, a string of words that did not belong to any language I knew, and yet somehow I understood every syllable of it, as though it had been waiting behind my own thoughts for me to notice it. Lily's hand found my shoulder, gripping hard enough to hurt. "Ethan," she whispered, "what did it just call you?" I did not have an answer for her. I only knew that whatever that title meant, the ship had chosen to speak it to me, and only me, and the moment it did, the lights along the corridor blazed fully to life, and somewhere deep within the hull, something enormous began to wake up. The floor shuddered under a low pulse that rolled outward from the heart of the ship, strong enough that Owen had to catch himself against the wall. Behind us, the hatch we had come through sealed shut, with a sound like a held breath finally released, cutting off whatever had been chasing us through the wreck. For one strange moment, that felt like safety. Then every screen and panel around us lit at once, displaying symbols and shapes I did not recognize, cascading faster than I could follow. And somewhere above the noise of it all, that same layered voice spoke again, quieter this time, almost gentle. "Command authenticated," it said. "Long dormant systems restoring. Welcome home." Lily was the first of us to move, stepping carefully toward a panel that had lit up nearest to her, though she kept her hands well away from it, like touching the wrong thing here might cost her more than a scan reading. Her voice, when she spoke, had lost the sharp edge it carried a minute ago, and had turned quiet instead, almost cautious. "This is not scavenger tech," she said. "This is not anything I have ever logged in a salvage report. Look at the way it repairs itself as it wakes. Half these corridors were sealed off and crumbling a minute ago, and now the walls are smoothing over like the damage never happened." Owen crouched near the base of the corridor wall, running his fingers along a seam that had, only moments before, been a jagged crack wide enough to see through into open vacuum. Now it was closed, clean, without so much as a scar to mark where it had broken. He looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, somewhere between awe and real fear. "You did this," he said. "Not on purpose, maybe, but you did." I told him I had only touched a panel, the same as I would have touched 100 other dead panels on 100 other dead wrecks, and none of those had ever answered back. He did not have a response to that, because there was no answer that made sense yet, only the plain fact that this ship had chosen to open itself to me, and to nobody else. Somewhere beyond the sealed hatch, muffled through layers of restored hull plating, I heard the sound of whatever had been hunting us pounding against metal, that no longer gave way. It hammered twice, 3 times, then stopped, as if it had realized the wreck it thought it was tearing into had stopped being a wreck at all. A low chime rippled through the corridor, followed by that same layered voice, steady and unhurried, in a way that made the sudden danger around us feel almost distant. "External threat neutralized," it said. "Hostile presence retreating from hull. Long-range sensors reactivating." I asked it, out loud, foolishly, whether it could hear me, and it answered instantly, without hesitation, as if the question itself amused it in some way I could not place. "I hear you clearly," it said. "I have been listening since the moment your hand touched the seal. It has been a long time since anyone spoke to me at all." Owen grabbed my arm again, harder this time, and pulled me a step back from the nearest panel, like putting distance between us might undo what had already happened. "Ask it what it is," he said. "Ask it why it is calling you that." Before I could get the words out, the ship answered on its own, as though it had heard the question in Owen's voice rather than mine. "I am a vessel of the old line," it said, "and you carry a signal in your blood that I was built to recognize. I do not yet know how that is possible after all this time, but I intend to find out, and so, I suspect, will others who are far less patient than I am." That last part landed heavier than anything else it had said. Lily's scanner buzzed, and she went pale reading whatever had just appeared on it, turning the screen toward me without a word. Far beyond the edge of the debris field, faint but growing steadier by the second, new signatures were lighting up across the display, vessels changing course, falling into formation, moving with the kind of discipline that scrap raiders never bothered with. The floor tilted under my feet before I had time to ask what those signatures meant. Not a shake or a shudder this time, but a deliberate motion, smooth and certain, the kind of movement that only came from something taking full control of itself. Owen stumbled and caught the wall, and Lily grabbed a support strut without needing to be told, both of them bracing on instinct, while I stood frozen in the middle of the corridor, feeling the whole ship come alive around me, like a held breath finally let go. "We are moving," Lily said, though she did not need to. I could feel it in my bones, a pressure building against my chest, as the ship pulled itself free from the tangle of wreckage that had buried it, for who knew how long. Metal screamed somewhere far above us, plating that had fused to the surrounding debris tearing loose piece by piece. And for a moment, I was certain the whole hull would crack apart around us, rather than break free in one piece. It did not crack. It pulled clear whole, shedding centuries of dead metal like a creature shrugging off old skin, and the layered voice spoke again, calm, even as the corridor rattled around us. "Extraction in progress," it said. "Please remain braced. Hostile presence has regrouped and is preparing to engage." I asked what hostile presence it meant, and the answer came a heartbeat later, in the form of a dull impact against the hull, then another, quick and rhythmic, weapons fire finding its mark against plating that shrugged the hits off, without so much as a flicker in the lights around us. Through a viewport that had not existed in the wall a minute before, one simply forming out of the smooth surface like the ship had decided we needed to see, I caught sight of the raiders who had been chasing us through the wreck. 3 low, ugly ships, the kind stitched together out of salvage same as everything else out here, firing everything they had at a hull that did not care. Owen let out a short laugh, disbelieving, half panic and half something close to relief. "They are shooting at us, and it is not even slowing down," he said. "It is not going to," I told him, though I had no idea if that was true. I only knew the ship had said hostile presence neutralized once already tonight, and it did not seem like the kind of thing that made promises it could not keep. The raiders scattered as we cleared the last of the tangled wreckage, peeling off in different directions the way animals do when they realize the thing they were hunting has turned out to be something far larger than they expected. One of them made the mistake of staying in our path a second too long, and the ship answered, without waiting for anyone to give it permission, a single beam lancing out from somewhere along the hull, precise and silent, and the raider's engine flared out in a burst of light before it spun off, dead in space, drifting. I did not feel good about that, even knowing what they had been trying to do to us minutes earlier. Lily must have seen it on my face, because she put a hand on my shoulder and said, quietly, "That ship gave them every chance to leave. They chose to stay." That did not make it sit any easier, but there was no time to sit with the feeling at all, because the moment we cleared open space, the ship's sensors lit with a wall of new contacts, dozens of them, arranged in formation, closing in from a direction none of the wreckage had blocked us from seeing before now. Owen's voice went tight again. "Those are not raiders," he said. "Look at the formation. Look at the drive signatures. That is a disciplined fleet, and it is not slowing down either." The layered voice spoke once more, and for the first time since it had woken, it sounded almost careful, choosing its words the way you would when delivering news you already knew would not be welcome. "Response fleet has arrived," it said. "They will have detected my activation signal the moment I woke. I would advise you prepare to be addressed. They will not open fire without confirming who commands me first, but they will not wait long for that confirmation either." I asked what would happen if they were not satisfied with whatever answer we gave them, and the ship did not soften the truth the way I half expected it to. "Then they will fire," it said simply. "It has happened before, to others who woke ships like me without an answer worth hearing." That was not the kind of thing I wanted to hear with a wall of warships bearing down on us, but there was no room left to argue with it, because a channel opened on its own, the ship routing the call through before I could decide whether I even wanted to answer it. A voice came through, human enough in cadence that it caught me off guard, though something underneath it carried a texture no human voice ever had, layered and resonant in a way that reminded me, uncomfortably, of the ship's own voice a few minutes earlier. "Unidentified vessel," the voice said. "You are broadcasting an authentication signal that has not been active in longer than most records account for. Cut your engines, and prepare to be boarded. Refuse, and we will not offer a second request." Owen looked at me, waiting, and Lily looked at me too, and for the first time since this whole night began, I understood that whatever happened next was not going to be decided by scanners or torches, or any skill either of them carried. It was going to come down to whatever the ship believed I was, and whether the fleet outside believed it too. I told the ship to cut engines. It obeyed instantly, without argument, the low thrum of movement fading into stillness, and I stepped toward the front of what I was already starting to think of as a bridge, though nothing about the room matched the cramped, cluttered command decks I had worked on my whole life. This space was open, layered in soft light, with a single raised seat at its center that had not been there when we first came aboard, rising smoothly out of the floor, like the ship had been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. "Do not sit in that," Owen said quickly, the old warning creeping back into his voice. "We do not know what that does." I did not sit in it on purpose. I was still walking toward it, trying to decide what to do with my hands, when the floor beneath me tilted just slightly, guiding me the last half-step forward, and the seat rose to meet me before I had fully decided to take it. The moment I settled into it, panels around the room brightened further, as if the ship had been holding part of itself back until I claimed that single chair. A docking clamp sounded somewhere along the hull, distant but unmistakable, metal meeting metal in a controlled, practiced motion. Boots on decking followed a moment later, measured and unhurried, someone walking without any fear at all toward a room they expected to control the second they stepped inside it. The door to the bridge opened on its own, and a woman stepped through it alone, unarmed as far as I could tell, dressed in a uniform unlike anything I had seen, dark fabric marked with silver lines that caught the light in patterns too precise to be decoration. She moved like someone who had walked onto 100 bridges before this one, and expected every single one of them to answer to her the moment she spoke. She did not speak right away. Her eyes swept the room once, cataloging Owen near the wall, Lily by the console, and then landed on me, sitting in a seat I had not chosen so much as been placed into. Whatever she expected to find in that chair, it was not a scavenger in salvage gear with grease still on his hands, from cutting through collapsed plating an hour earlier. Her expression did not change much, but something behind her eyes did, a flicker of calculation turning quickly into something closer to disbelief. She took one step closer, then stopped herself, as if some part of her did not trust her own legs to carry her the rest of the way, without confirmation first. "Say your name," she said, quiet now, none of the command left in her voice at all. I told her my name, plain and simple, the same name I had carried my whole life, nothing about it grand or old, or worthy of the look that crossed her face when she heard it. She did not answer right away. She stood very still, studying me the way you would study something you had been told all your life could not possibly exist, right up until the moment it was standing in front of you anyway. I asked her name, mostly because the silence had stretched long enough that I needed something to fill it, and she answered without looking away from me, almost absently, like the question barely registered against whatever was running through her mind. "Illyra," she said, fleet commander of the response line assigned to this sector. Behind her, through the open bridge door, I caught sight of two other officers waiting in the corridor, weapons lowered but not holstered, watching their commander with the kind of tense patience that told me they were expecting an order any second, one way or the other. Neither of them moved to follow her in. Whatever protocol governed a moment like this, apparently only one of them was allowed close enough to confirm it. Illyra took another step forward, slow this time, deliberate, and reached toward a panel near the seat, not touching me, careful to keep distance even as she leaned in to study the readout that bloomed to life at her gesture. Her fingers hovered over lines of data scrolling too fast for me to follow, old symbols mixed with something that looked almost like a genetic chart, and whatever she was reading there made the color drain further from her face. "That signature should not exist," she said, more to herself than to me. "Not on a human, not on anyone, not after what happened to the line generations ago." Owen shifted where he stood, clearly wanting to ask what that meant, but something about Illyra's posture kept him quiet, the same instinct that kept her own officers standing frozen in the corridor outside. She looked up from the panel and met my eyes again, and this time there was no calculation left in her expression at all, only something raw and unguarded, the look of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just cracked open in front of her. "Do you know what this ship called you when it woke?" she asked. I told her I did not really, only that it had used a title I did not recognize, one that had somehow made sense to me anyway, the way a word in a language you never learned can still land right if you hear it spoken with enough certainty behind it. She let out a breath, slow and unsteady, and for the first time since she had walked onto the bridge, her composure slipped just enough to show the person underneath the uniform. She looked past me, toward the raised seat, toward the walls glowing softly around us, like the ship itself was holding its breath waiting for her verdict. "It called you what it was built to call, exactly one bloodline in the galaxy," she said. "A line we were told ended a long time ago. A line my own service was created to make certain never surfaced again, whether that meant protecting it or burying it, depending on which century of the order you asked." I did not know what to say to that, and for once neither Owen nor Lily filled the silence either, both of them watching Alira with the same careful stillness she had walked in with, as if any sudden movement now might shatter whatever fragile understanding was forming in the room. Alira straightened, pulling her composure back into place piece by piece, though I could see it cost her something to do it. She looked toward the corridor where her officers still waited, then back to me, and when she spoke again, her voice had steadied, but only barely. "I am not going to make a decision like this standing in a doorway," she said. "I need answers, and this ship has more of them locked away than either of us will like. But I want you to understand something, before we go any further into this." She held my gaze, and for the first time since she had walked in, there was no command in her posture at all, only a kind of weary honesty that felt more dangerous than any weapon her officers carried outside. "If what I think just found me tonight is real," she said, "then there are people out there who have spent a very long time making sure it never happened. And the moment my fleet reported this activation signal, they will have heard it too." She asked for a private channel, one that would not carry back to her own officers waiting outside, and the ship granted it without needing to be told, a soft chime confirming the room had sealed itself off from anything beyond its walls. Owen and Lily stayed near the console, close enough to hear everything, and Alira did not object to that, which told me she had already decided this was not a conversation that needed hiding from the people I trusted. She pulled a thin device from her belt, something that looked less like a weapon and more like a diagnostic tool, and asked permission before she stepped close enough to press it against my arm. I let her. Whatever this was, it felt less dangerous than sitting in silence not knowing what she already suspected about me. The device hummed for a few seconds, then produced a soft tone, and Alira studied the reading on its small display, with an intensity that made the room feel smaller than it was. When she finally looked up, her hands were not quite steady. "This is not a partial match," she said. "This is not something close enough to argue away as coincidence. This is a full genetic signature, the kind my order catalogued centuries ago, and swore was extinct. I have spent my whole career being told this line ended in fire, on a world most records will not even name anymore." I asked her, plainly, what that line actually was, because every answer so far had circled the question without landing anywhere close to it. She turned toward the ship itself, addressing it directly rather than me, her voice carrying the practiced formality of someone speaking to an authority she still half feared despite everything. "Vessel," she said, "open the sealed archive. Authorization override. Command line. Response fleet seal." The layered voice answered without hesitation, and this time there was something almost relieved in the tone of it, like it had been waiting a long time for someone with the authority to ask. "Archive unsealed," it said. "Records restored to active display." The walls around us shifted, panels folding away, to reveal projected images hanging in the open air of the room. And I want to be honest, that my mind briefly stumbled, trying to process shapes and symbols that belonged to no history I had ever studied. Cities built along coastlines of a world I did not recognize. Fleets far larger than anything Alira's small response force could hope to match, and at the center of every image, a crest, simple in its design, repeated again and again across banners, hull markings, the collars of uniforms worn by people who all carried some faint echo of features I saw every day in the mirror. "That is the old royal seat," Alira said quietly. "The line that held it were not conquerors, not in the way most empires remember their founders. They were the ones who kept 100 smaller worlds from tearing each other apart during an age when everything out here still fought over scraps. People trusted that seal because for centuries, it never broke a promise it made." I asked what happened to them, because every account she was giving me led toward an ending nobody had spoken plainly yet. Her jaw tightened. "A faction within the old court decided that trust was a weakness," she said. "They believed unity built on one bloodline's word was fragile, compared to a system, an order, something that could not be assassinated or bargained with the way a person could. They struck during a ceremony meant to celebrate a treaty, not end one. Every direct heir in that hall died within minutes. The official record calls it a tragedy. My training called it a necessary correction. I have spent years now slowly understanding those are not the same thing at all. Owen finally spoke, quiet but firm, the question sitting plainly in his voice. If they killed everyone in that hall, how is Ethan standing here right now? Illyra looked at me for a long moment before she answered, and when she did, her voice had dropped lower, like she was choosing each word carefully enough to not let it slip loose before she was ready. Because not everyone was in that hall, she said. Records from the period are fragmented on purpose, scrubbed by whichever side won control of the story afterward. But there are gaps, missing shuttles, missing manifests, a handful of names that vanish from every registry within days of the massacre, instead of appearing among the dead. My order always assumed those gaps meant destroyed records, not survivors. We were wrong to assume that. I understand now how wrong. The ship's voice cut in then, calm as ever, though something in its tone carried what almost sounded like an old, patient grief. A shuttle departed the capital, 6 hours before the ceremony began, it said. I was assigned to escort it. My last confirmed logs show it entering a long-range transit course, destination scrubbed from my own memory as a security measure, in case I was ever captured and interrogated by the faction responsible. I have carried an empty space where that answer should be for longer than any of you have been alive. That empty space, Illyra said slowly, would explain a signal appearing on a world nobody in the old empire ever surveyed. A quiet, unremarkable world, tucked far enough from any major route that nobody searching for a lost bloodline would think to look there. Lily's breath caught audibly, and I understood why. Because the shape of what Illyra was circling toward had finally become impossible to avoid. She was not describing some distant, abstract history anymore. She was describing exactly where a person like me would come from, if every piece she had just laid out happened to be true. I asked her directly, because dancing around it any longer felt worse than hearing it plainly, whether she was telling me my own homeworld had been chosen for us on purpose, hidden rather than simply forgotten. She held my gaze without flinching this time. I am telling you that is the only explanation I have left that fits every reading this ship has given me since the moment you sat in that chair, she said. I do not enjoy saying it. It means everything my order believed about that massacre being finished business was wrong from the very beginning. Before I could answer, a new tone rippled through the bridge, sharper than anything the ship had used before, and Illyra's head snapped toward the nearest console on instinct, years of training answering faster than conscious thought could. Report, she said, and the ship answered immediately, all trace of quiet reflection gone from its voice, replaced by something clipped and urgent. Long-range sensors have detected a fleet altering course toward our position, it said. Signal patterns match a private security network outside standard fleet registry. Based on encryption style and approach vector, probability is high this force operates under directive from a faction historically associated with the suppression of the old royal line. Illyra's expression hardened instantly, the raw honesty from a moment ago folding itself away behind something colder, sharper, the fleet commander returning in full. They intercepted the same activation signal we did, she said. Of course they did, and unlike my order, they are not interested in confirming anything before they act. If that fleet is who I think it is, they are not coming here to ask questions. Owen looked between the two of us, jaw tight, already reaching instinctively for the crude sidearm he carried on every salvage run, a tool meant for scrap raiders, and nothing close to what was apparently now bearing down on us. How long, he asked, do we have before they arrive? The ship answered without pause, and there was no comfort at all in the certainty of its response. Not long enough to finish this conversation, it said. I recommend deciding, quickly, who is standing on this bridge when they do. Illyra turned toward the corridor, where her own officers still waited, and for a moment, I thought she meant to call them in, to hand this whole situation over to a chain of command that made more sense than a scavenger sitting in a throne he never asked for. Instead, she raised a hand, a quiet signal through the open doorway, and both officers stepped back out of sight without a word of protest, trusting her judgment even without understanding what had just passed between us. They will hold position outside, she said, turning back to me. What they do not witness directly, they cannot be forced to report in detail later. That buys us time, not safety. I want to be clear about the difference. Owen was not ready to let his guard down that easily, and I did not blame him. He kept his sidearm loose in its holster, watching Alira with the wary patience of someone who had learned the hard way that trust offered too quickly in situations like this one tended to get people killed. "Why would you buy us any time at all?" he asked her. "An hour ago you were ready to have your fleet open fire on this ship the moment it failed to answer you properly. What changed?" Alira did not flinch from the question, which told me something about her worth more than any explanation she could have given. "What changed," she said, "is that I have spent my entire career enforcing an order built on the idea that a massacre generations ago settled a debt permanently. If that debt was never actually settled, then everything my service has done since has been built on a lie somebody else wrote down and called history. I do not enjoy discovering that, but I would rather stand here and discover it than keep serving people who buried the truth on purpose." Lily, quieter than either of them, asked the question that had clearly been sitting behind her eyes since the archive first opened. "If this other fleet finds Ethan first, what happens to him?" Alira's answer came without hesitation, flat and unadorned, in a way that made it land harder than if she had softened it at all. "They will not risk letting a claim like his exist long enough to be proven," she said. "Silence is easier for them than debate. That is how the original massacre was justified in the first place, and factions like that do not tend to grow more patient with time. They grow more efficient." The ship's voice returned then, calm but insistent, cutting through the tension with the practical urgency of something that had clearly lived through moments like this before, and did not intend to watch history repeat itself, without at least trying to prevent it. "I can delay their approach," it said, "but I cannot stop it indefinitely. My defensive systems have been dormant far longer than my archives. Full function will require time to restore, time we may not fully have before contact." I asked how much time that left us, and the answer, when it came, was not generous. "Less than I would like," the ship said, "and less than Commander Alira's own escort will be comfortable waiting through, once they realize how serious this situation has become." Alira exhaled slowly, some of the composed authority slipping from her shoulders as the weight of the moment settled fully onto her. She looked at me directly, no longer studying me like a puzzle to be solved, but like a person she had already, somewhere in the last few minutes, decided to take seriously. "I need you to understand something plainly," she said. "Once that fleet arrives, there will not be room left for quiet conversations in sealed rooms. Whatever you decide to do with what this ship believes you are, you will need to decide it soon, because the people coming for you will not offer you the courtesy of time to think it over." Owen looked at me, waiting, the same question sitting behind his eyes that had been there since the moment the hatch first opened back in the wreck. I did not have a clean answer for him yet, only the growing certainty that whatever choice I made next was not going to be a small one, and that the ship's earlier warning had not been an exaggeration at all. I sat back in the seat that had risen to meet me without asking, and for a moment, I let myself think about the life I had been living only hours earlier, cutting salvage out of dead hulls, splitting whatever we found 3 ways, worrying about fuel costs and cracked filters, and nothing bigger than the next job. None of that had prepared me for a room full of projected banners bearing a crest that apparently belonged, in some distant and impossible way, to me. I asked Alira plainly whether she believed any of this herself, or whether she was simply following wherever the evidence led, because her training demanded it. She considered the question longer than I expected before answering. "I believe the readings," she said. "I have spent enough years learning to trust instruments over instinct that I do not think this is a trick of the equipment. Whether I believe what it means for the wider order I serve, that is a harder question, and I do not have a comfortable answer for it yet either." Lily moved closer to the console, watching the slow crawl of distant contacts approaching on the display, her earlier fear settling into something steadier, more focused, the look of someone deciding to be useful instead of afraid. "If they are still out there," she said, "how much can this ship actually do once it wakes up the rest of the way? Because right now, it sounds like we are betting everything on systems that have been asleep longer than any of us have been alive." The ship answered her directly, and there was something almost reassuring in how plainly it laid out its own limits, rather than pretending to more strength than it currently had. My core functions are restoring in priority order, it said. Defensive shielding is at partial capacity. Weapon systems remain largely offline, pending full diagnostic. I was built to be formidable once fully awake, but I have been asleep a very long time, and I will not insult any of you by pretending otherwise. Owen let out a short, humorless breath. So, we are riding a legend that has not stretched its legs in longer than recorded history, against a fleet that has been actively hunting threats like this the whole time. That is an accurate summary, the ship said, without any trace of offense at the bluntness of it. I would still rather be found half awake with all of you aboard than have remained buried in that wreck a moment longer, waiting for a hand that never came. Something about that answer settled a little of the fear sitting in my chest, not because it made the danger any smaller, but because it reminded me this ship had been waiting a very long time for exactly this chance, and it did not intend to waste it out of caution alone. Illyra straightened once more, pulling her attention back to the practical matter in front of us, the fleet commander returning fully now that the moment for quiet reflection had passed. Whatever choice you make, she said to me, I need you to make it fast, because that other fleet is not going to sit patiently outside sensor range while we finish sorting through history. If they reach effective range before this ship's defenses are ready, none of the answers we found tonight will matter at all. I asked her, straight out, what she would do in my place, because it felt like the only honest question left worth asking. She held my gaze for a long moment before answering, and when she did, her voice had lost every trace of formal distance it carried when she first walked onto this bridge. I would decide, right now, whether I intended to run from what this ship believes I am, or stand in it, she said. Because after tonight, there will not be a version of your life left where nobody notices which one you chose. Before I could answer her, the console beside Lily flared bright red, and the ship's voice cut back in, urgent now in a way it had not been even a minute earlier. Contact confirmed, it said. Hostile fleet has entered engagement range. Weapons fire detected. The hull shuddered under the first impact, a deep, rolling shock that traveled through the floor and up through the soles of my boots. Lights along the bridge flickered once before steadying, and Illyra was already moving, all hesitation gone from her now, replaced by the same crisp authority she must have carried through 100 engagements before this one. Shields holding at partial strength, the ship reported. Recommend immediate evasive maneuvering. I am diverting available power away from non-essential systems to reinforce the hull. Do it, I said, and the word left my mouth before I had fully decided to be the kind of person who gave that order. The ship responded instantly, the deck tilting hard beneath us as it rolled away from a second volley, throwing Owen against a support strut and nearly pulling my own feet out from under me before the seat's restraints caught and held. Through the viewport, I caught a glimpse of the attacking fleet properly for the first time. Sleek gray hulls stripped of any markings, deliberately anonymous, in a way that told me more about their purpose than any insignia could have. They moved with the same crisp discipline Illyra's own escort carried, which meant whoever commanded them had trained just as hard, for just as long, toward exactly this kind of moment. Illyra studied the display over Lily's shoulder, her jaw tight. Unmarked command structure. Private funding signatures on their drive cores, she said. This is not a state fleet. This is the kind of force built by people who wanted deniability more than they wanted glory. That confirms exactly who sent them. A new alert chimed, sharper than the others, and the ship's voice carried a note of genuine concern for the first time since it had woken. Boarding pods launched from the lead vessel, it said. They intend to take this ship intact rather than destroy it. I estimate impact against my outer hull within moments. Owen was already moving toward the corridor, checking the charge on his sidearm with the kind of grim focus that came from years of surviving situations that should have killed him. If they are boarding, he said, then we are not winning this by sitting in that chair, Ethan. Somebody has to hold that breach. Illyra fell into step beside him without a flicker of hesitation, drawing a weapon from a concealed holster at her side that she had not shown any sign of carrying until that exact moment. I will hold it with you, she said. I did not walk onto this bridge to watch it fall the same night I found it. I told the ship to reinforce whatever corridor the boarding pods were aiming for, and it answered immediately, panels along the walls shifting subtly, strengthening in ways I could feel more than see, like the whole vessel was bracing itself along with the rest of us. The impact came a moment later, A heavy metallic clang, followed by the shriek of cutting tools biting into hull plating that had not been breached in longer than anyone alive could account for. Lily stayed at the console, feeding information to the rest of us as fast as she could read it, her voice steady, even as her hands moved quickly across controls she was only just learning to understand. "Breach forming 2 corridors down," she called out. 6 signatures, maybe 7, moving fast once they are through. Owen and Illyra reached the junction, just as the final layer of plating gave way, sparks scattering across the corridor floor as armored figures dropped through the gap, moving with brutal efficiency, clearly trained for exactly this kind of assault. I stayed back near the console at Lily's insistence, though every instinct in me wanted to be down there instead of sitting safely apart from the danger everyone else had walked into on my behalf. The fight that followed was fast and ugly, nothing like the clean, distant violence of ships trading fire in open space. Owen fought with the practiced economy of someone who had been in exactly this kind of close, desperate scramble before, using the narrow corridor to his advantage, letting the attackers bottleneck themselves one at a time, rather than facing them in the open. Illyra moved beside him, with a discipline that spoke of years of formal training, precise and controlled even under pressure, covering the angles Owen could not reach on his own. I watched through a feed Lily pulled up on the console, my hands clenched so tightly on the edge of the seat that my knuckles ached, feeling every impact land somewhere in my chest, even from a distance. The ship, meanwhile, was not idle either. Sections of corridor walls shifted subtly as the fight moved through them, narrowing at key moments, widening at others, as if it were actively shaping the battlefield to favor the 2 people defending it. Small adjustments that Owen and Illyra both used without needing to be told why the terrain kept working in their favor. "It is helping them," Lily said, half amazed, despite the danger still unfolding in front of us. "It is actually helping them." "I am protecting what is mine to protect," the ship said simply, and something about the plain certainty in that answer settled a knot in my chest that had been tightening since the first impact hit the hull. The last of the boarders fell back through the breach they had cut, retreating rather than pressing an assault that had clearly cost them more than they expected, and Owen leaned hard against the corridor wall, breathing heavy, a shallow cut along his arm that Illyra was already moving to press a hand against, steady and practical even in the aftermath of the fight. "That is one wave turned back," she said, straightening after confirming Owen's injury was not serious. "It will not be the last. Whoever commands that fleet will not accept a single failed boarding as the end of this." She made her way back toward the bridge, and when she stepped through the door again, something in her posture had shifted permanently from the woman who had first walked in cautious and composed, unwilling to commit to anything until she understood it fully. This time she crossed the room and stood directly in front of the seat, meeting my eyes without any of the earlier distance at all. "I have spent my whole career serving an order that called itself the guardian of a peace built on a lie," she said. "Tonight I watched people fight to protect a name they only just learned belonged to someone real, because they believed it was worth protecting. I am done pretending I have not already made my choice." She lowered herself onto one knee then, right there on the bridge, and the gesture landed heavier than any words could have, an old formality neither of us had been taught the same way, and yet somehow both of us understood exactly what it meant in that moment. "Command the line as it was meant to be commanded," she said, "and I will stand behind it, whatever that costs either of us, before this is finished." Owen and Lily both went quiet, watching, and I sat there in a seat I had never asked to claim, understanding for the first time that whatever this ship believed I was, other people were now willing to bleed for that belief alongside me, and that meant I no longer had the option of treating any of this as something that might simply pass if I waited long enough. The ship's voice returned, steady and warm in a way I had not heard from it before, almost like relief given shape and sound. "Command fully restored," it said. "Full systems will require several minutes yet, but I no longer stand alone in this fight, and neither, I think, do you." Lily pulled her attention away from the console just long enough to look at the 3 of us gathered near the seat, and though her voice carried real worry, there was steel underneath it now that had not been there back in the wreck. "If we are doing this," she said, "then I want to know exactly what we are up against, not just who sent them. Ethan deserves that much before he decides anything else tonight." Illyra rose from where she had knelt, and something in the shift of her posture told me the formal weight of the moment had passed. replaced now by the practical urgency of a commander laying out a battle plan. "The faction behind that fleet calls itself the Ashcrown Directorate," she said. "They emerged from the ashes of the old court after the massacre, built on the argument that bloodlines make weak foundations for lasting peace. For generations they have operated as a shadow authority, funding private fleets like the one currently outside, cleaning up anything that threatens the story they built their legitimacy on." Owen pressed a hand against the cut on his arm, wincing slightly, as Illyra's earlier field dressing held firm. "So they do not answer to any government we could appeal to," he said. "No court, no council, nobody to argue our case in front of. They answer to their own leadership structure, and little else," Illyra said. "Their commander in this sector is a man named Draven Kor, methodical, patient, and utterly convinced that what he does protects countless worlds from the chaos a return of the old line would supposedly cause. He will not be persuaded by argument. He will only be stopped by force, or by making the cost of continuing this pursuit higher than he is willing to pay." The ship's voice returned, quieter now, almost thoughtful. "I have partial records on Commander Kor's operational history," it said. "He favors overwhelming initial force, followed by a demand for surrender, before committing his full strength. The failed boarding attempt suggests he still believes this can end without further losses on his side. That belief will not last much longer." I asked what that meant for us, practically, in terms of time and options, because every answer so far had told me more about the danger than about any path through it. "It means," Illyra said, "that we have a brief window before he commits everything he has. If this ship can reach full capability before that happens, we stand a real chance of making him reconsider the cost of this pursuit entirely. If it cannot, we will be fighting his whole force with barely restored systems, and whatever the four of us can manage with our own hands." Lily's fingers moved rapidly across the console, pulling up a status readout that painted a clearer picture of exactly how much ground the ship still had to cover before it could call itself whole again. "Weapon systems at 40%, she read aloud. "Shield regeneration climbing steadily, propulsion fully restored. We are not ready, but we are not helpless either." I looked toward the viewport, where the gray hulls of the Ashcrown fleet held position, just beyond effective range, patient, confident, clearly expecting whatever demand their commander intended to issue next, rather than a fight they assumed they had already half won. Something about that confidence settled a quiet resolve into my chest that had nothing to do with bravery and everything to do with simple refusal. "I am not interested in surrendering something I only just found," I said, mostly to myself, though every head in the room turned toward me when I said it. Illyra's expression shifted into something that might have been the beginning of real respect. "Then we use every minute Kor gives us to prepare," she said, "because the moment he decides talking is no longer worth his time. This ship, this crew, and whatever you are becoming, will be tested in ways none of us can fully prepare for in advance." A new tone sounded from the console, calm but insistent, and the ship's voice carried a fresh note of clarity that had not been present even a few minutes earlier, as though some final piece of itself had just clicked fully back into place. "Incoming transmission," it said. "Commander Kor is requesting to speak with whoever now holds command of this vessel." Illyra glanced at me, waiting, no longer offering guidance so much as simply confirming that the decision, and the voice that would answer it, belonged to me now. "Open the channel," I said, and felt the weight of that choice settle over the bridge like a held breath finally about to be released. A man's face appeared on the display, calm and unhurried, the kind of composure that came from genuine confidence rather than performance. He wore no rank insignia I recognized, only a plain gray uniform that matched the anonymous hulls waiting beyond our shields, and his eyes moved over the bridge behind me, with the careful attention of someone cataloging every detail for later use. "You woke something that was better left sleeping," he said, his voice even, almost gentle, which somehow made it more unsettling than open hostility would have been. "My name is Draven Kor. I imagine Commander Illyra has already told you what my order believes about the seat you are currently occupying." I told him I understood well enough, and that understanding had not made me any more willing to hand this ship over, without knowing exactly what waited for me if I did. Kor's expression did not change. "What waits for you is simplicity," he said. "Step away from that command chair, allow my people to secure the vessel, and you walk away from this with your life intact. I have no interest in punishing a man for an accident of birth he never asked for. I am only interested in preventing the chaos that history tells us follows whenever that bloodline returns to power. Illyra stepped into view beside me, and her voice carried none of the deference an officer might once have shown a man like Kor. History tells us what your order chose to write down after silencing everyone who might have argued otherwise, she said. I have seen the sealed archive myself tonight, Draven. The massacre you built your legitimacy on was not justice. It was fear, wearing justice as a disguise. Something flickered behind Kor's calm for just a moment, quickly smoothed back over. Commander Illyra, he said, I had hoped loyalty to your order would outweigh sentiment discovered in the space of a single evening. It appears I was wrong to hope for that. You were, she said simply. Kor's gaze returned to me, and whatever patience he had been extending clearly reached its limit in that exchange. Then we understand each other, he said. I gave you the chance to walk away from this quietly. What happens next will not offer that same kindness. The channel closed without another word, and almost immediately, the ship's voice cut through the sudden silence left behind. Full fleet advancing, it said. All available Ashcrown vessels have committed to engagement. Shield and weapon systems now at 73% capacity, and climbing. Lily's hands moved fast across the console, feeding numbers and positions to the rest of us as quickly as she could track them. They are spreading into an encirclement pattern, she said. If they close that formation before we can break out, we will be fighting from every direction at once. I asked the ship, directly this time, whether it had anything left that could tip a fight like that in our favor, because raw shield strength alone did not sound like enough against a fleet clearly built to overwhelm exactly this kind of resistance. There was a pause before it answered, longer than any hesitation it had shown before, and when it finally spoke, there was something almost reluctant in its tone, like it was offering an answer it had hoped not to need. There is a function reserved exclusively for command, authenticated by direct bloodline signature, it said. It was designed for moments precisely like this one, when the vessel and its rightful commander stand together against overwhelming odds. I have not activated it in longer than I can accurately measure. I cannot guarantee what condition it remains in after so long dormant. Illyra turned toward me sharply. That function is not in any record my order possesses, she said. If the old line kept something like that sealed away even from allied fleets, it must have been considered dangerous enough to hide from everyone, not only its enemies. I asked the ship plainly what would happen if I chose to use it anyway, because standing still while an encirclement closed around us did not feel like an option worth considering any longer. It will draw directly from my remaining reserves, and from a resonance tied to your own signature, it said. I cannot promise it will be comfortable. I can promise that without it, the odds Lily is currently calculating will not improve on their own. Owen, leaning against the console with his injured arm still tender, met my eyes without hesitation. Whatever it costs, he said. It costs less than losing this fight before it even starts. I did not follow you through that hatch to watch us surrounded and picked apart out here. I looked at Illyra, and she gave a single firm nod, the last trace of doubt gone from her expression entirely. I already made my choice back on that corridor floor, she said. I am not stepping back from it now. I told the ship to do it. Authorize the function, whatever it costs, however uncertain the outcome. The response was immediate and overwhelming, a surge of light spreading outward from the seat itself, climbing up through the walls of the bridge in patterns that mirrored the ancient crest we had seen projected in the archive only a short while earlier. I felt it more than saw it, a pressure building behind my eyes. Not painful exactly, but vast, like standing at the edge of something far larger than myself, and being asked to hold its full weight without flinching. Function engaged, the ship said, its voice carrying a depth and resonance I had not heard from it before, layered now with something that sounded almost like the ship speaking through me, rather than simply to me. Synchronization confirmed. Full capability restored. Outside the viewport, the encircling fleet hesitated, their advance breaking rhythm for just a moment, as whatever sensors they carried registered the sudden, dramatic shift in our own ship's output. That hesitation was all the opening the ship needed. It moved before I consciously decided anything, weaving between the tightening formation with a grace that belonged to something far more agile than its size should have allowed. Weapons fire lancing out in precise, controlled bursts that found engines and shield generators instead of hulls, disabling rather than destroying. A restraint I somehow understood was deliberate rather than accidental. "I am not interested in matching Kor's cruelty," the ship said, quiet beneath the roar of the engagement unfolding around us. "I am interested in ending this without becoming the very thing his order accuses my line of being." One of Kor's ships broke early from the formation, either through panic or a miscalculated attempt to flank, and drifted directly into the ship's firing arc at close range. I felt the decision form and act almost before I recognized it as mine, a controlled burst, aimed with precision at the vessel's drive core, rather than its crew compartments, disabling it in a single strike that left it drifting harmlessly, rather than breaking apart entirely. It was not mercy exactly. It was closer to a kind of discipline I did not know I carried until the ship helped me find it. Kor's voice broke back through the channel, sharp now, all his earlier calm replaced by open alarm, as ship after ship in his formation reported crippled systems rather than confirmed kills. "Continue the assault," he ordered someone off-screen, voice climbing. "Full barrage, now." The remaining ships tried to comply, but the coordination that had made their encirclement so dangerous minutes earlier had already fractured, disabled vessels drifting out of formation, forcing the rest to scramble into looser, more desperate patterns that our own ship slipped through and answered with the same measured precision as before. Lily called out shifting positions. Owen fed her updates from a secondary console he had taken over despite his injury, and Alira stood beside me, issuing tactical suggestions the ship folded seamlessly into its own instant calculations. Through it all, I felt something building in me that was not quite exhaustion and not quite exhilaration, a strange, steady clarity that made every decision feel obvious the instant it was needed, like the ship and I had stopped being two separate things making choices in sequence and become something closer to a single will, moving in one direction. Kor's flagship broke from the loosening formation, driving directly toward us with a desperation that told me he understood, finally, that this engagement was already lost, and that his only remaining option was a strike, aimed squarely at ending things, before that loss became permanent. The ship read the maneuver before Lily could even call it out, rolling to meet the charge head-on rather than away from it, weapons converging on precise points along Kor's hull, with a focus that felt almost surgical. The flagship's own weapons fired one last ragged volley before its shields buckled entirely, and our ship absorbed the impact without so much as a tremor through the deck, the restored strength of its defenses finally standing fully proven under the worst pressure the night had thrown at it. A final, disabling strike found Kor's engines, and the flagship went dark and drifting, the last coordinated resistance from the Ashcrown fleet collapsing into scattered retreat around it. Silence settled over the bridge in the aftermath, broken only by the soft hum of restored systems cycling down from the peak of whatever the ship had drawn on to see us through. I sat back in the seat, feeling the strange, vast pressure behind my eyes recede slowly, leaving behind something closer to simple, bone-deep tiredness than triumph. Illyra was the first to speak, her voice quiet, almost reverent, in a way that felt strange coming from someone who had walked onto this bridge only hours earlier, ready to end my claim to it with a single confirmed scan. "That function should not exist anywhere in any record my order kept," she said. "Whatever the old line built into this ship, it was built to be unstoppable, in exactly the hands it was meant for, and only those hands." Owen let out a long breath, easing down against the console, some of the tension finally draining from his shoulders now that the immediate danger had passed. "Remind me never to complain about a slow salvage run again," he said, and despite everything, I found myself laughing, short and disbelieving, the first real release of tension since that hatch had first slid open back in the wreck. Lily confirmed the retreating Ashcrown vessels were falling back toward the edge of sensor range, no longer holding formation, no longer any threat to the ship or the people standing inside it. "Kor's flagship remains disabled but intact," she added. "He is alive. I do not know if that is good news or not." "It is good news," Illyra said firmly. "A man like Kor, defeated and left breathing, will spend the rest of his career explaining tonight to superiors who will not be forgiving of failure this public. That damages his order more deeply than his death would have. Dead, he becomes a story they control. Alive, he becomes a problem they cannot hide." Owen glanced toward the viewport, where the last of the retreating hulls faded into the dark beyond effective sensor range, leaving nothing behind but drifting wreckage, and the slow, steady hum of a ship finally standing whole again, after a night that had asked everything of it. He shook his head slowly, the disbelief still fresh on his face even now that the danger had passed. "I still do not fully understand what just happened," he admitted. "I only know that whatever it was, none of us walked away from it the same people we were when we climbed through that hatch a few hours ago." Lily allowed herself a small, tired smile as she finished securing the navigation console, the first real moment of ease any of us had shared since the wreck. "Whatever happens next," she said, "at least we found out the hard way that this ship keeps its promises." I asked her what came next, because defeating one fleet in one corner of space felt like the opening move in something far larger than any of us had fully grasped yet, and I did not believe for a second that the Ashcrown Directorate would simply accept tonight's outcome and walk away from the question entirely. She considered the question seriously before answering, meeting my eyes with the same steady honesty she had carried since kneeling in that corridor. "Next," she said, "we make certain the rest of the galaxy hears what happened here tonight, on our terms, before Core's order has the chance to bury it the way they buried everything else. A name like yours cannot stay hidden anymore. The only choice left is whether the story people hear about it comes from truth, or from whoever controls the silence around it." I looked around the bridge, at Owen nursing his injured arm with quiet relief, at Lily, already pulling up navigation options for wherever we intended to go next, at Alira, standing steady beside the seat that had chosen me before I had any say in the matter at all, and finally out through the viewport, at the drifting wreckage of a fleet that had come here certain of an easy victory over a threat they assumed was still asleep. The ship's voice returned once more, quieter now, steadier, carrying none of the strange vast weight it had held during the fight, only something that sounded, unmistakably, like relief. "Welcome home," it said again, the same words it had spoken the very first moment I touched that sealed panel back in the wreck, except this time I understood exactly what they meant, and I was no longer afraid to answer them. "I am not going anywhere," I said, quiet, certain, meaning every word of it. "So you had better start explaining what I actually am, because from tonight forward, I intend to find out everything this line was ever meant to become, and I do not plan on doing it quietly."